Hey YouTube, welcome back to my channel. This is the real Nathan Daley and I'm your law enforcement translator here to provide insight as a 13-year law enforcement veteran. You guys, what are we talking about today? We are going to talk about and discuss an update on a very tragic officer involved shooting with the victim Patrick Lyoya. For those who are unfamiliar about this case, I will pin the initial video that I did on this particular encounter. You guys, if you haven't seen that, please check it out. And listen, for those who are here for the first time, welcome to the channel. Please hit the subscribe button and the like button. And those who are interested in being a part of this channel and the journey, you guys, please join the channel. I'd love to have you as a investigator. So you guys, listen, before we go into all of this, I just want to say prayers out to the family. This was a very tragic incident. For those who remember this situation, I will give you a brief summary of the incident, and then I'm going to dive into the updates. I will give you the news coverage in regards to the prosecutor and why they decided to actually charge the officer involved who shot and killed Patrick Lyoya. This incident began April 4th, 2022, you guys, in Grand Rapids, around approximately 8:30 a.m. An officer from Grand Rapids, Officer Scar, actually pulled over Patrick Lyoya in a gold Nissan. The reason why he stopped him was because the license plate did not match the vehicle. You guys, that is not an uncommon traffic stop. That is actually a legitimate and lawful reason to stop a vehicle. During that encounter, before the officer was able to exit the vehicle, Patrick exited his vehicle. Then the officer got out the car and made contact with Patrick. When he realized that Patrick wasn't able to provide any identification, he then tried to detain him or arrest him at the scene. Patrick resisted by pulling away, and then he ran. He fled. The officer chased after him. He finally caught up to him. They got into a tussle. And during that tussle, the officer decided to pull out his taser. He attempted to tase Patrick, but it was ineffective. Patrick did reach and grab his taser. The officer was unable to maintain his taser. Patrick took a hold of the taser and was wrestling with the officer again. As they both eventually went to the ground, the officer was on the back of Patrick, and Patrick was facing, his stomach was facing to the ground, but he was still holding on to the taser. And then the Officer Scar, then drew his weapon and shot Patrick in the back of the head. Now, you guys, I have the original video. That video that I did a live stream on. I play that video for those who have not seen it. You can go and check that live stream. I will not be playing the actual footage here on this particular video. So moving forward, you guys, what are we looking at? A lot of people had an issue with that encounter, you guys, and rightfully so. It was very barbaric, right? The officer shot Patrick execution style in the back of the head. A lot of people are asking, was it justified? Could the officer have done anything else? You know, what's going to be the outcome of this situation, you guys? I'm going to break it down. I will discuss police procedures and whether or not this was a lawful use of deadly force. Before we get into that, I want to play the clip in reference to the prosecutor who is and decided to prosecute and arrest the officer. That officer turned himself in. He is being charged with second-degree murder. So let's dive into this news clip. I'll play it out and then we'll discuss it.
Thank you for all coming here this afternoon. I appreciate it. My name is Chris Becker. I'm the Kent County Prosecuting Attorney. Before I get with my announcement, I do want to publicly acknowledge the Lyoya family, their tremendous patience and understanding as this process has developed. It's been very difficult. The loss of a child causes unimaginable pain, stress, and the emotions they must be going through all of this. I deeply appreciate what they've done. I also want to thank the Michigan State Police for their dedication and really doing a thorough investigation in this matter. Detective Sergeant Aaron Tubergen really did an excellent job. He's done everything I requested of him, even on some of the follow-up. Based on his investigation, based on everything he has provided to me, I've made the decision to charge Christopher Schur with one count of second-degree murder. Second-degree murder is a felony offense. It is punishable by up to life in prison with the possibility of parole. As it stands now, this is merely an allegation, and as with any defendant, he is presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. The elements of second-degree murder are relatively simple. First, there was a death done by the defendant, and then when the killing occurred, the defendant had one of these three states of mind: an intent to kill, an intent to do great bodily harm, or the intent to do an act that the natural tendency of that act would be to cause death or great bodily harm. And finally, that the death was not justified or excused, for example, by self-defense. Taking a look at everything that I reviewed in this case, I believe there's a sufficient basis to proceed on a single count of second-degree murder, and that charge has been filed with the courts as of today. It is my understanding, I've been in contact with the Michigan State Police, that Mr. Schur has turned himself in. He has been being processed. He will be arraigned in the 61st District Court in the city of Grand Rapids. It is my understanding that arraignment will take place sometime tomorrow. I do not have a specific time or date. That is up to the court. That is a function of the court, if you will, to take care of that. So that concludes my statement. As I said, I'll take some questions. I'll answer the questions that I can. I may not be able to answer all, and I'm just...
Now that was the prosecutor, Chris Becker. He's very confident. He stated that his office decided to charge the officer with second-degree murder, and they were very confident behind the charges. When you look at the elements of the crime, Michigan is saying that what the officer did was unlawful. They're saying that they do have enough to actually charge him, and they did, you guys. The officer turned himself in. What are they saying in reference to the elements of the crime? They're saying that this murder was carried out in the heat of the moment. But not only that, this action cannot be justified by self-defense. We're going to break it down, what it means to use self-defense, the use of force that the officer used. We're going to break down what the court has said is appropriate and not appropriate for officers. Can he or does he have a way to beat this case, you guys? I think there's a way. There's absolutely a way. There's a lot of things that can be argued on behalf of the officer, and there's a lot of things that cannot be argued on behalf of the officers. We're going to talk about both sides. I think it's very important, and I'll let you decide. This is going to go to trial. There will be a jury that's going to look at the case. They're going to look at the evidence. Everybody is innocent until proven guilty. This is also true for the officer. So we have to make sure we look at both sides and be very, very impartial when we're passing our judgment. The one element that's not considered is what the officer was thinking at the moment, what the officer was going through, and the officer's wellness during this encounter. All of this can be seen and captured on body cam, except for the thoughts, the experience, the fear, if there was any, and the condition, the mental condition of that officer in the moment when he decided to use deadly force. In this particular case, what is the defense going to be looking at? What are they going to argue, you guys? The officer had a legal, justified reason to stop Patrick on that day and time of question. What are they looking at? He had a legitimate traffic violation. The officer is obligated to investigate. He was doing so when Patrick resisted arrest. What are the other issues that are in question? You guys, Patrick did not have a legal driver's license. His license was revoked. You guys, one thing that they're going to bring up in this case to help the officer is, of course, Patrick's criminal history. You guys, this is something that a lot of people don't like to talk about. They don't like to discuss this piece. They feel like it's a way to deflect and dismiss the actions of the officer. You know, I have to disagree with that, and I'm going to tell you why. Unfortunately, the media will try to use it in order to discredit the victim. We know this to be true. At the same time, it's done without context, you guys. It is very important to understand whether or not the person has a significant criminal history or whether or not they have a warrant. In this case, you guys, Patrick had an active domestic violence warrant. He had a warrant for his arrest. That warrant was issued approximately 3 to 4 days prior to him being shot. You guys, why is this important? Well, it speaks to the person's state of mind when they are encountering the police officer. What's the other issue? You guys, he has been arrested and prosecuted for 3 different separate counts of DUI. He has a theft conviction as well on his record, and he also has a few other traffic violations such as hit and run. Now, some would argue that that is irrelevant because the officer at the time did not know that. That within itself is not important, and here's the reason why. Patrick is the only one that's well aware of his criminal history, his past, or whether or not the officers would be looking to arrest him. Why is that? One, he doesn't have a license. He's very well aware of that. He also knows that he has gotten in trouble with a domestic call or a domestic issue, which led him to have a warrant for his arrest. Either way, Patrick was going to jail. Either way, he knew he was going to get arrested that day. You guys, that matters. That absolutely matters. That speaks to the person's ability to understand whether or not they're going to have a positive or negative outcome in this interaction with law enforcement. This is why it's important to discuss any past criminal history, because it does speak to the mindset. And when you have someone who is in a situation where they are afraid to be arrested or they are fearing the outcome of the traffic stop, they might possibly act irrationally. As we see in this video, it does speak to the behavior. The defense is going to use that as leverage to justify the officer's use of force or wanting to arrest, wanting to pursue. Why is this important, you guys? Unfortunately, in this job, people commit a lot of dangerous crimes and it goes undetected. And sometimes you have an offender who knows that they just got done doing a dangerous crime and they're willing to do whatever they can to keep from being apprehended. So as an officer, you don't know what you have. You don't know why this person's resisting. You don't know why they want to fight or why they are willing to go to such great lengths to get away. As officers, we just can't let people go. Oftentimes I hear people say, how come the officer could not just let him go? You guys, unfortunately, that's just not how it works. When a person violates the law or they violate a particular type of crime, you guys, they do have to be held accountable. We cannot start setting a precedent where we just let people go simply because they don't want to be held accountable or they don't want to be arrested. You know, unfortunately, there's been plenty of situations where I've stopped people for minor offenses and it turned out that they had warrants for felony murder. They had warrants for sexual assault. They had warrants for kidnapping. You guys, so sometimes these things might start small and they end big. You never know why people are resisting arrest. The reality is we need to tell people not to resist arrest. You know, that's not okay. We cannot have a country where we just allow people to avoid being captured or think that that's okay or that that's the appropriate way to deal with the situation. So moving forward, let's break down the issues in this particular case. I'm going to give you guys an overview on what it means to use deadly force. What's required of the officer? Did this officer check all the boxes? What is my issues with this case? I'm going to give you my professional opinion. Then I'll give you my personal opinion. We're going to argue both sides. One of the things I want to talk about more specifically is the officer's use of force, the officer's inability to absolutely apprehend someone who was passively aggressive. What does that mean? It means someone who's trying to get away, they're resisting arrest, but they're not assaulting you, right? One would argue, was the officer in danger in this encounter? You guys, honestly, I would say no. He wasn't. Patrick was never an active threat to the officer. What was he doing? He was resisting arrest. He wasn't cooperating. You guys, yes, that's not okay. At the same time, the officer's response to that level of resistance, you guys, was it wasn't appropriate. It absolutely wasn't appropriate. What does it say to me about the officer? What if the officer didn't have a taser? What would he have done? We always discuss how important it is for training with officers and how this is a key component and why officers end up relying much more on the gun than they do with their hands. Unfortunately, in this situation, in my personal opinion and professional opinion, the officer was poorly trained. He did not have any skills, you guys. He did not have enough skills to apprehend someone who was not forcefully resisting, actively resisting at all. He wasn't struck by Patrick. He wasn't assaulted by Patrick, and he was unable to subdue him without using any of his weapons, without using any of the tools. You guys, an officer should be very well versed in hand-to-hand combat. What have I noticed lately, especially in these cases, and this specifically, is that officers lack defensive tactic skills, meaning hand-to-hand combat, being able to use joint manipulations, being able to actually subdue a suspect who's unarmed without having to use any of their weapons. You know, a lot of officers lack the confidence in that area. Therefore, they lean and rely and depend on their weapons, such as the taser, the baton, the spray, or unfortunately their gun. In this situation, you guys, when you watch the video, one thing that really stood out about this entire encounter is that it lasted from the moment Patrick resisted, approximately 3 minutes. It's 3 minutes long. The officer has seen and he's heard on his body camera, he's out of breath, he's exhausted, he's out of shape. You guys, this is a factor. This is actually very important. This can actually lean into the officer's defense. Why do I say that? He's wrestling with someone who is passively resistant. Where's the threat? The officer has tired himself out. He cannot even manage Patrick in this moment. What happens? Patrick made a very, 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 very dangerous decision by grabbing the taser and then also taking the taser from the officer. You guys, that within itself could result in lethal force being used against Patrick. You guys, but timing is everything. Proximity, the use, imminent danger. These things are very, very important, and they're necessary to determine whether or not an officer had justification to use lethal force. You guys, we're going to talk about it. The officer's response was poor. You have an officer that's trained poorly. He's out of shape, no conditioning. Not only that, he's unable to use his hands in order to subdue a passive resisting person. This is a problem. What does the court say an officer needs to use deadly force? What's the policy, you guys? It's what we call ability, opportunity, and jeopardy, AOJ. What does the ability mean? The ability talks about whether or not the suspect has the means to actually cause the officer harm. What does the officer need? Does the suspect have the ability to create great bodily harm and or death to the officer? Those are the elements. Did he have the ability, you guys? Yes, he did. What did he have? He had the taser. He had the officer's taser. That within itself is the weapon. The weapon is not lethal, but it is less lethal. If the officer is hit with the taser at any point in time, he can be incapacitated. And in that moment, the suspect could gain an advantage over the officer by taking the officer's gun or doing anything else that could put the officer in imminent danger, you guys. So that within itself gives the suspect the ability to create harm against the officer. What's the other? Opportunity. Does he have the opportunity to actually carry out the threat? What does that mean, you guys? It speaks to the proximity. Is the suspect in close enough range to actually utilize the weapon, utilize the threat against the officer? The question, the answer is yes to that. What position was he in? He was on his stomach, right? He was on his knees. The officer was on his back. He had the taser in his right hand. You guys, he was still close enough. He could have used it. Yes, this is possible. One can argue that. And that's something for the attorneys, the prosecutor to do. But yes, he's in close proximity to still utilize that weapon. Is he still a threat? Absolutely. Now, what's last that needs to be addressed, the last element is jeopardy. Jeopardy. Jeopardy meaning imminent danger. Was the officer in imminent danger in receiving the actual threat? We know he had the ability. We know the opportunity was there. But imminent, you guys, I don't know. I would have to say, in my professional opinion, I don't see him being in imminent danger. Now, one could argue both ways. And why do I say that, you guys? I say it's 50-50. It's 50-50. What I see from a professional standpoint is the condition of the officer. What is his internal faculties like? What's actually going on with his body? You guys, he was out of it. He was out of breath. He was tired. What is going on inside the mind of the officer? A lot of times people don't like this argument, but in these situations, officers use the idea of, I feared for my life. You know, and that is a problem with this. This is the caveat and the use of force spectrum when an officer can lean on being afraid. Unfortunately, fear is very subjective. It's going to be on him to be able to prove how fearful he was. Is the jury going to believe that? How are they going to explain that? in a situation where you have mounted someone on their back, one would argue that you had control. Or did you? Can you justify the fact that you felt that your life was in imminent danger? You guys, I have to disagree. I don't see it. Does the officer have an argument? Of course he has an argument he can make. We still have to hear his side of the story. He's innocent until proven guilty, right? So again, we have to look at everything in its totality. The one piece that we're missing is, again, the condition of the officer in the moment. What are people saying though when they see this incident? They said he executed him from behind. He shot him in the back of the head. It was very barbaric. In my personal opinion, it was unnecessary. It was unnecessary. Unfortunately, the way use of force works in this country and with law enforcement is that as long as the boxes are checked, you guys, you're justified in using deadly force. But just because you can use lethal force doesn't mean you should use it. Just because you can doesn't mean you have to. And I think what ends up happening is people can see moments where, yes, the law says it's okay, but was it necessary? This is the argument. And I think what ends up happening is you have to take these things back to the drawing board and really examine, did the officer have any other choice? This is what the people are looking at. And I think this is what the jury is also going to look at and examine. I think this is what the prosecutor is looking at as well. Could he have done anything else? I know what the law says. Was he in imminent danger to receive great bodily harm, you guys, or death? Those are the two caveats. They have to be able to satisfy one or the other. Was he? I'll let you decide. One thing that we can discuss, though, is that we should both agree that fear within itself should not be enough for an officer to lean on the use of deadly force. At what point do we start considering an officer's ability to actually do the job effectively and efficiently? The officer's skill set needs to be taken in consideration. The officer's wellness needs to be taken in consideration, meaning, is the officer healthy enough to do this job? Or did the officer put himself in a situation that he could not have handled? Meaning, if you have a 400-pound officer trying to fight and put someone under arrest and you having a heart attack in the process, then you have to then lean on your gun to save yourself. I believe it should be looked at as the officer put himself in harm's way by not being in shape, not being fit for duty in order to actually carry out the job, because then now you put yourself in danger and then you force yourself to use deadly force to protect yourself when you were not fit to do the job in the first place. Not fit to do the job means you're not trained properly either. There's no excuse for the officer not to have been able to subdue him while he was unarmed. He lost his taser in the process, meaning the officer had poor weapon retention skills. You guys, this is important. This is absolutely important. And to be completely honest with you, if the officer would have shot Patrick in the moment he took the taser away, he would have had a stronger case in my personal opinion. But the way he shot him, the way this turned out, I believe it's going to be a coin toss, and it's really going to come down to the jury and what they see and how strong the defense is going to be in explaining the officer's decision. At the end of the day, it does not look good for the officer. I don't see him being able to beat this case. At the same time, you guys, you never know. All right, you guys, well, that's it for this stream. Thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight, just going over this case. I really appreciate it. If you haven't already, please hit the like button. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. We have great discussions like this all the time over here. I really appreciate your support. And listen, I want to know your thoughts. Did the officer have any other ways of handling the situation? Was there anything else he could have done in that moment in order to mitigate the situation more effectively and still preserve the life? You guys, I absolutely think so. He could have held him down longer. He could have waited a little bit longer for backup before doing anything else. He could have put him in a chokehold, which a lot of people don't like, but I would have used it. He could have pinned him down. He could have used his body weight. There was a lot of things he could have done, but I believe that the use of force was extremely unnecessary based on the circumstances. Does the law support it? Possibly. There's a strong case the officer has. But again, that one piece, that one element that the officer is missing is imminent threat, imminent danger. I don't believe the officer had that, and I don't believe he's going to be able to satisfy that. Now, with that being said, unfortunately, these things look awful, but it does not mean it's not lawful. But this is one of the issues that society is asking that we fix about law enforcement, and I do agree with them. There needs to be a change, a substantial change, especially with training, protocol, and procedures. This is why training is important. You guys, there is an answer. There's also a solution to these issues. We just have to talk about, are departments willing to change? Are we willing to evolve policing in order to match society's demands? Unfortunately, we are operating really below standard. We're operating below the expectations that society is asking us to be at. And that is really the problem at the end of the day. Are departments, is this profession willing to go above and beyond to ensure the satisfaction of the citizens? I truly believe this is something that should have never escalated to this level. But again, here we are, and there's a lot of things that need to be addressed because of it. I'm curious to know what you guys think. Please put your comments and your questions in the comment section. I will definitely get to as many as possible. You guys, thank you again. Thank you so much. And with that, good night. God bless.